intro prepared, and then we'll say to everybody, hello. Be right back, kids.
Welcome to The Joy of Living, featuring your host, Barry Shore. In this time of busy, and rush, we don't always take the time to appreciate the life that we have and the love of those around us. Now, the ambassador of joy invites you to take a moment, take an hour, and find the joy of living. Here is Barry Shore.
Good day, beautiful, bountiful, beloved, immortal beings, and good-looking people. Remember, you're good-looking because you're always looking for and finding the good. We have good and abundance because we have three of the most dynamic people on the planet with us today. I'm counting myself among them for the moment until we get rid of me and bring in somebody else. Let me just ask you to check your email. Okay, and see if that works. Great. Never a dull moment in life. And that, we got Diane also. Wow.
Hi, Diane.
Hi, Mara.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Absolutely fantastically wonderful. So everybody, you see up in the corner says, The Joy of Living with Barry Shore. It should say the marriage webinar. We had a lot of wires get crossed and do things and all kinds of stuff, but we're here and we're going to be talking about some very interesting ideas and topics as we do every time we have the marriage webinar. And we have our usual and unusual guest. So I'll be the unusual because Nicole is usual. But we have up here, let me see. I wonder if I can rearrange this. Bear with me. Let me see how I can do that. No, that didn't work. Try another thing, Mr. Shore. No, I'm trying to shuffle and I'm not. Diane, you're always up in that corner.
Always in the top right.
Yeah.
I'm on the bottom left on my screen.
Yeah, but we don't want you to. We want you. Well, we'll just keep going. Anyway, I'm sure somebody else could do it better than I, but it doesn't matter. So we are here to discuss that most remarkable process that still exists in the United States of America, which is literally holding the country together. And if it wasn't for marriage, I think that, and the values that we bring in marriage and what we still call holy matrimony, I think that the United States of America would be in a more precarious position than it is even now. And it is in a precarious position now. And now, wait a minute. We got a full house and we got overflowing with good. Hami Haber is with us also. So let me just give a, this is great. As one person mentioned to me a number of months ago, he says, Mr. Shore, you just too much estrogen there. You need some more testosterone, but what am I going to do? I can't, there's only so much testosterone I can bring here. But it's a pleasure being surrounded by beautiful, bountiful, beloved beings that are all female, and I'm happy for it. So I'm just going to jump right in and introduce people, and then we'll go to a couple of questions. I've had 138 questions that came in for this webinar. And it's really amazing, by the way, because as Diane and Maura know, our webinars are usually on Wednesdays. So we had a number of people saying, how come you switched to Thursday? And I'll tell you why in just a little bit. But suffice to say, it's good to shake things up every once in a while anyway. So I'm just going to go through introductions because it's always important that people know who they are both listening to and who is responding to the inquiries. So we'll begin with Dr. Diane Medved, who is now occupying a different position on the screen. There she is, but she's really up in the far left corner of the country, which it truly is, in Seattle, Washington. But she's holding down the fort as a semi-conservative, or maybe in a full conservative. Certainly with her household, they're full conservative. All right, split household. But, in Washington State, but she's originally from California, and that's how we know each other, thank God, for decades. And in addition to being a well-respected psychologist and an author and a a talk show participant. She is one of the most interesting people that I've ever had the pleasure of interacting with. And she brings a perspective of marriage that is unique in the sense that she's written a number of books about marriage, one of them being Don't Divorce, or we'll tell us the exact title, The Case Against Divorce. Yeah, I got it right. Don't divorce.
I have also a book called The Case
Case
Against
against divorce. That's right. So I had a case and I had a double D. Don't divorce. So that's wonderful. Diane Benton will be speaking in just a moment. We have Maura Sweeney in the middle of the screen, and she's down in the right-hand corner in conservative Florida. And Maura is the ambassador of happiness, not because I said so, but because the United Nations says so. So who am I to argue with the United Nations? And she truly is. We've known each other now going on our second year and participated in a number of different events. And she's truly charming, wonderful, and brings a different and unique perspective because she's the balancing out. She's the Catholic wing of the organization at the moment. And we have in the upper right-hand corner, Nicole Bloom, who is now a fellow desert inhabitant. She moved from Southern California into the desert of Henderson, Nevada. And both she and her husband are in the teaching profession. And Nicole, in addition to many other things, married, children, a beautiful environment with her synagogue. She was teacher of the year at LA Unified. I think it was either 2 years ago, because you moved last year, so you couldn't be still. So she brings a great perspective from the point of view of actually as mother, wife, and teacher in the classroom. And we have Hami Haber in the left-hand corner, and Hami hails from Norfolk, Virginia, which of course everybody knows is that great, wonderful Jewish community of Norfolk. You know, it's vibrant and alive with thousands and thousands, hundreds of Jews. It's not New York City. And Hami and her husband have a unique position in Norfolk because they bring at one and the same time a Jewish perspective, a conservative perspective, and Hami is a teacher, a coach, and a guiding spiritual light for her community. And then you have me, Barry Shore, the ambassador of joy, the one who has been, thank God, attracting these magnificent people to discuss issues that are very, very important in our society today. One of the things we're not going to discuss at length, we'll just mention in passing, is the whole idea of COVID and vaccination. We're going to put that off to the side and not on the table right now. What we will do, though, is discuss, because these are most of the questions that come up, is the presence of COVID vis-a-vis kids, school, and masks. And I can say this because I've thought a lot about it. I mean, a lot, on a regular basis. And I say to myself, Mr. Shore, as much as you enjoy being alive and doing things, would you want to be a kid in school these days? And I say to myself, no, I wouldn't want to. When I went to school, which of course is ancient history to anybody watching, let's be blunt. I didn't put this on just to say that I'm older. You know, I'm not going to take it off later. I'm 72 years chronologically. I may only be 28 mentally, and metabolically I'm 48 because I swim 2 miles, and my SOW is 8. SOW stands for sense of wonder. I'm an 8-year-old, childlike, not childish. I would not want to go to school these days. I'd be too confused. I'm telling you. And so my first question is, and it's not my question, it's a question from 33 people. And I'm going to throw to the panel. Are kids confused about school? In other words, what to do? What is it? What's happening? All the questions that kids ask, but let's just focus and ask the basic questions. Let's talk about kids for the moment in high school. And I think high school was 13 to 17, something like that, which is some of the most difficult ages to discuss. And after that, we're going to go to lower ages, but let's, for the moment, focus, 13 to 17. Are kids really confused about what's going on? Are they nervous? Are they scared? So that's a big open question, I realize, but those are the questions I'm getting. People asking just like that. My kids are scared or my kids are confused. What do you say? What do we do? Diane, you're up first. And by the way, great necklace, kid. Great necklace.
Yeah, we do this to show off the necklace. Well, I mean, obviously I haven't heard the question, but the answer is yes, kids are confused and they're afraid and they're insecure because everyone is. How can they not be? Their parents feel that way. Their parents don't know if their jobs are going to be from home or going to be from work, thereby having a crowded home, or maybe there's learning going on the computer. They can't see their friends necessarily. Things are changing. Masking makes communicating difficult. Sure, this is a tough time for everyone. And I think the way to handle it, which was not in the question, but I think that's what people are looking for.
Yes.
Is to be upfront, honest, transparent, and just reassuring that to the child that you're there for the child, that you are going along with this process with them, and that they're not alone, that they always have a solid home to come home to, that they will always be loved, and that your connection to them, your supervision of them, your caring for them will always be there consistently, even though they may be having all kinds of changes with school. And I have to say, it's a great thing that in many cases schools are going back. And it's also a great thing that inoculations, vaccinations for kids are around the corner, because I think that people will start to feel more and more secure as COVID recedes. The less COVID, the less fear. The more security, the more consistency that we can provide our children.
So this is very good. Let's go to the point of, like you said, reassuring. And because if parents are confused, and by definition, kids are going to be confused. And is reassuring, excuse the expression, enough? Let's take Nicole. You're both a parent and a teacher. How do you interact with your kids and with kids in the classroom?
So I will say for kids in the classroom, I think that this year is incredibly challenging in a lot of ways. The norms of school life keep changing on them, right? Like the rules to the game keep changing, and it's hard for kids to know what's expected of them because kids like routine and they like consistency and they like to know what to do in different situations, right? Like that's really important for all of us. But I think a little bit more for kids because kids haven't developed, they don't have the experience that we do as an adult. So they're not as easily, it's hard for some adults to adapt, right? But it's especially hard for children. So for the past 2 years, year and a half, right? The rules were a little bit different. Kids in a lot of districts weren't allowed to fail. Like that was actually policy in some districts. That they weren't allowed to cover new material when schools first went out of the classroom. When we first, in February, March, schools started to leave. In some schools, they weren't allowed to cover new material. So their learning essentially paused wherever they were. And then they had a year of online learning, which varied greatly depending on where they were. So, kids in different districts in the same state had vastly different experiences. And then this year, they're expected to pick it all back up again as though they haven't been out of school essentially for a year and a half, right? They're continuing with whatever the next grade was and whatever the next standard was. And, as teachers, a lot of us are definitely trying to be accommodating and doing our very best. But again, like in terms of standards and what we're, expected to cover, a kid who was in 9th grade is in 11th grade now. They have.
So let's ask again, we're talking specifically, if you can, about teenagers, because teenagers have another, we'll call it issue, which is they're teenagers.
Yeah. So
You know,
it's super
you
hard.
can deal a lot. Oftentimes, again, I'm using me as an example. I'm trying to remember back being a teenager. I was a teenager, full blown, and a guy. So you're talking about kids that, like you said, they're now expected to cover new ground that they may or may not even have any reference to because, oh, that was last year. We didn't do that, but hey, too bad. You'll just continue. And you're right. Kids in general don't like that. Teenagers they start acting out and acting up, if it were. So are you finding that kids are accepting all of these new rules, or are they outspokenly rebelling?
I don't think that they're outspokenly intentionally rebelling. I think that a lot of kids are just really struggling with being able to adjust and being able to work within the confines of the school environment, not in an intentionally disrespectful way at all. I think that, I mean, when you think about it, our sophomores at my high school have never been on campus until this year, right?
That's right.
You're a sophomore in high school, but you've never been on campus. Like, they didn't know where any of the buildings are. So we have sophomores who are basically freshmen. So, but the freshmen are freshmen. So basically half the school are freshmen.
Okay, so you know something, is a learning experience for everybody. Maura's in the most unique situation because Maura is a mother, but her daughter is full grown, or at least we
I
hope
homeschooled her.
so.
So.
And so she doesn't have kids at home. She's not interacting with kids at school. But Maura, what can you think about the situation with kids in school, and how could parents adjust to helping out kids in a more, let's say, like Diane mentioned, this great word, reassuring way?
You know, as I'm listening to this, you're right. I don't have any children in school. Our daughter's out. But I have been around a couple of high school kids from 2 different high schools recently. And also just the other day, I was at a junior college. So I'm somewhat kind of connected. And I do know a few teachers here in Florida. We had a different experience, and I don't know if it's all of Florida, but we are
very good, right?
And we did have a time when the schools were closed down, but then the kids came back and they had a choice. So there were some students that were learning from home. They were on Zoom, and there were other students who were in school. So unlike what Nicole was saying, where you had an entire year that was lost socially and otherwise, we didn't have quite as many interruptions. And I think because we had a group of students that always maintained being in the classroom, there was the semblance or the sense of sameness. And this is kind of how things go. So I think from our perspective here in Florida, West Coast, where I'm living, it's probably a little bit different from some of the other states. But that's a huge question you asked, Barry. The idea about what feels comfortable, how do people enter into this situation again about school? I would say that there is a vast difference between some people who are totally unaffected, and I could see that here in Florida. I was talking to a couple of junior high school kids in school 2 weeks ago, I think it was. They were all out playing. It was like normal, kind of like I would have thought a few years ago. And then you get others who were very, very concerned. You know, I have friends like this. They're afraid of catching anything, so that it interferes with every relationship, with every decision, with closeness, with social engagements, with everything. And Diane had mentioned before about making children feel at home and comfortable. One of the things I would like to share is that I think that there's been a polarization of the way people have addressed this whole situation with COVID. What do? We have people on both sides of the equation. And I think sometimes we need to be able to share in the same environment. What makes you feel comfortable? What makes someone else feel comfortable? How can we honor each other, give people enough space, and yet not be so dogmatic one way or the other? And I think that that's one of the things that maybe all of us as a society can learn and develop, so that it's not all this or all that, but we find a way where everyone feels comfortable. Like here in Florida. There were some parents that were comfortable having their kids at home, although the teachers didn't like it too much because they said there were kids in bed. I have a neighbor, she teaches high school. She said, Maura, you know what that was like? Oh, she teaches phys ed. She said, Maura, do you want to know how difficult it is telling a kid to get out of bed and do the jumping jacks? So there's a lot in between.
It can't be done.
So that was frustrating. But as I said, I think I'm coming at it maybe from a different perspective, given where we are here in Florida. But I think there's a way of finding some standards we can all work around. There's got to be some basic framework we can all work with. And then I think it'll probably move forward into what we were all saying. We used to know what school was like. We knew the rules. We knew how to play them. And then all the rules seemed to go away in so many different places. But when people could come together and say, all right, what works for us? This is the new norm. And I think kids, after not too long of a time, they're very adaptable, can adjust.
So that's what I want to hear from everybody. We're going to ask Kami first. I want to hear from everybody that kids are resilient and flexible. You don't have to say it yet. I'll say it. You don't have to agree with me. Let's go to Kami. Kami, you have a number of children. I think it's 4 or 5, right?
6 now. Thank God.
Yeah, you still last count. And you also teach at the school, and it's a parochial school. We'll call it a private school, but a parochial school. And in addition to that, you have outreach. You work with a lot of different people in your community. So, and you're just going back to school now because we had a spate of Jewish holidays, and we're just coming back in to go to school now. Maybe even today was the first day, or maybe it's not going to happen until Monday. But the point is, people coming back to school, how they take high school kids. I don't know if you have high school kids there. What is their main concern, if there is one? And are they coming back with knowing the rules, or are they very anxious and fearful at the moment still?
Honestly, our kids are doing okay, I hope. I think there are a few differences between Nicole's talking about a campus and a big school, lots and lots and lots of students. We have a really small school because it's a Jewish school in Virginia, in Norfolk, Virginia.
How many children?
So, I don't want to answer that.
Okay. But it's less than 300.
Yes, significantly. We're small enough that we really know each child well. And we were in masks. We were in person last year in masks. And the deal was if you had any symptoms at all, you stay home and you Zoomed in. So often we had one student on Zoom, but for the most part, we were in school with either masks or 6 feet distancing, which was great because we were able to put the desks 6 feet apart and they could take their masks off when they were sitting at their desks. So once we sat down, it was normal class. And I think that was very reassuring for the students that this is normal. Okay, when I get up to go to the bathroom, I have to put my mask back on. But other than that, and they took their temperatures on the way in. Obviously, it wasn't exactly the same, but it was fairly normal. There was a little bit of anxiousness in June when we didn't know how we were coming back. So the governor hadn't announced what was going to happen in this school year. And the kids were like, well, what's going to happen? Are we going to be like pre-COVID? Or are we going to be like, but we came back the same way as last year. Masks are 6 feet. And the high schoolers, I think, are doing okay. Part of the reason I think is also our approach as parents and educators and a religious community has been all along, we don't know why this is happening, but we believe that it's from God and it's good. And that the children live that way. We live that way. And it made it so much easier because we're able to say to the kids, this is hard and we don't know why it's happening. And we can validate that it's a big challenge, but we always fall back on our faith that this is from God and it must be good.
This is very important what you're saying. Again, Diane got the ball rolling with the reassuring. So you're adding another layer of reassuringness to the mix, which is not only are the adults and the teachers themselves reassuring children, but the parents and the teachers are reassuring themselves that whatever it is that the process we're going through, which is by definition challenging, you can't just say, oh, gee, it is what it is. No, this is a challenge. This is a life-altering challenge. but we hold as self-evident that this is from the Creator and by definition of benefit. And when you go in, now again, this is Chami speaking, so you go in with that mindset, that enables one to minimize the fear factor, I think, because the kids can see that the adults are not trembling. Now, again, not that adults go around being trembling, but they may be tremulous. In other words, they may exhibit fear. Parents do that. Parents who are unsure may exhibit fearful attitudes. But if they think and believe that there is some overarching goodness to this, whatever it is, then you can approach it with a different kind of mindset. That's very interesting. Now, Maura, you can appreciate that because you come from that background as well. But please say, what are you going to?
Hami, as soon as you said that, I'm thinking, I love that answer. And then I realized you're in a faith-based school. No, I really do, because, and I thought, I've got something to add to this, because my next thought was, well, what about all the parents that are listening that have their kids in public school? But what you have and what you just said about this backdrop of faith, when you're outside, let's say, the school of faith setting, you could be in a public environment and you can still, as a parent, convey that same faith, whether or not you speak it or you don't. And I love that, because you know what? I want to tell you, that's how I live. I don't have to broadcast everything that's going on in my head, what I think about God, but I did come to this conclusion that wherever I am, so I'm speaking to any parent, my faith is always in God. And my faith is really that God's going to be my protector. God's going to lead me. He's going to guide me. I'm going to go through hard places. I've already been there, but I know God will lead me out. So if that's my belief system, if that's the way I live my life internally, then that becomes, even in a more secular setting, could I use a very, I'm going to use a word, I'm going to say like the vibration or the vibe that I carry with me everywhere I go. So think about the parents. What is it that you believe in? Do you believe that all of this is ultimately going to work together for our good? And if that's something that you carry within you as a belief system, you can convey that to your children. It comes through
this is the point.
in everything you are. And then the kids then could go out each day and they could feel something of that sense of faith, however you want to describe it, but the sense that things will be okay, that there's a benevolence watching over, carrying us through. And I'm so happy you mentioned that, Ham. You might have a small school. You made a statement, right? That's a huge statement.
So
and
actually,
I think very helpful for anyone who's listening.
As a religious leader, my husband's the rabbi of our synagogue, so that makes me a religious leader somehow. But at the very beginning, I believe it was March of last year.
Oh, that was a great quote. Didn't I see that in the Bible? Yeah, I'm okay. Very beginning.
But really in March of 2020, people's faith was shaky. It was hard. And I gave a talk on Zoom, of course, for my community, for the women in my community, which I entitled, "It's Not Out of Control, It's Out of Our Control." And just making that shift to say, it seems like it's out of control, but somebody's controlling this and he knows what he's doing. And then I actually, the next day, instead of teaching my high school students my regular topic, I said to them, hey, this is what I spoke about with the grownups last night. I want to share it with you. And it was much more of a discussion with the students than it was with the adults. But this is just the running backdrop in our lives. So it didn't surprise them that when something challenging happened, we had that faith with us. And in fact, a friend of mine who teaches high school in New York, in an Orthodox high school, composed a song. I'm not going to sing it, but the refrain is, I accept that this is how Hashem wants it to be. Hashem is God. This is how God wants it to be. And I trust that it must be designed with love for me. And that was like the COVID anthem. Every high school student in the Orthodox, like all the Orthodox high school girls were playing the song. Oh, my daughter, who was 17 at the time, played it nonstop. And it was just so affirming.
That's teenagers. You got to follow the teens. They know what's happening. Well done. By the way, so we do have, it's important to announce, we do have, thank God, a worldwide audience. it's actually numbering in the many thousands these days. And we have a listening audience in China. I've had a number of emails from people in China and India, throughout Australia, throughout and Singapore, number throughout Africa, Europe, obviously United States, Latin America, and such. And the reason I mention this because whenever you mention the God, now to the dyslexic people, it's not a problem because they hear DOG. But whenever you mention the God, some people go, they freak out. I want to make clear something. It is important for people to understand the quote that I've found helpful to me over the past number of decades. And that is the following. People talk about faith and they usually append a word before it, blind, right? People talk about blind faith. So one of the great quotes that I saw decades ago was, faith is not blind, it's visionary. Isn't that great? Yeah. Faith is not blind, it's visionary. And so, Kami, when you brought that out and I saw Maura light up and Diane nodding her head, Nicole, you muted yourself. I don't know if you meant to, but that's okay.
Yeah.
There you are again. Because
my ridiculous doc.
Yeah, so it's important that when we talk about faith, whether you are a believer or not is beside the point. Because I think what Kami is bringing out and Maura seconded, and I think everybody, at least on this call and the panel, would attest to, is that anything and everything that can bring about a lessening of fear and a channeling of reassurance, as Diane began the program with, is all to the benefit, especially for teenagers. Because the reason I mentioned I started with teenagers, because in any family, let's just say there's more than one child in a family, 2 or 3, sometimes 4, 5, 6, but depending on the family, the teenager will be the one that's leading the charge, as it were, also. And it's important that the teenager be able to exhibit some sort of belief and trust and reassurance that things are or will be fine. And so now what happens is I made a mistake and I'm paying for it now, but that's
and I was looking to see, it was my phone. I have that same
it was my phone.
What did I do?
And it's because today is Thursday, it's not Wednesday, and I have a standing meeting with one of my dearest friends in the world, who's my rabbi, for learning at 4 o'clock our time. But it went out of my mind because it's not Wednesday, it's Thursday. So I'll have to call him back and say, I'm sorry, but so forgive me. But the point is that I was making here I started with teenagers, and we'll talk now about lower grades, is because I believe that when kids, and we'll call teenagers kids, are given responsibility, oftentimes they live up to it, not down to it. And if they can now take on the mantle of, for want of a better term, adulthood, in the sense that they could show other kids that it's going to be okay. These are the things that we do. This is how we protect ourselves, and we make sure that it's going to be okay. Then I think that's a learning experience that emerges from the challenge. Now, I'm saying this, nobody has to agree with me, but I'm saying that's part of the good, I think, that's coming out of this really difficult situation, is that you'll have, obviously not for every teenager, but a lot of teenagers will actually step into the program and become the ones who become leaders for themselves and for others. So I don't know if you're seeing that at all in the classroom, Nicole. Oh, you don't want to talk?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Sorry. My neighbor has a gardener because it's Thursday and not Wednesday.
You have God in the house? Okay, we'll try one more time. Okay.
I do think that when you give kids, high expectations, that they do live up to them, especially teenagers. I think that's one of the best things that you can do for a teenager, is to give them responsibility and to give them some sort of an overarching purpose, so that they have something to live up to and to work towards within the realm of their, right? We call it in teaching the zone of proximal development. So you want to give them
the
something
zone
that's
of what?
proximal development. So you want to give
the
them something
ZOPD.
that's a reach, but not a stretch, right? Something that they're reaching for, but they're not necessarily stretching for. So it's a goal that's just outside of where they are. So it gives them something to work towards and a purpose, but not that's going to be unattainable, right? Like if I'm trying to get in shape, I'm not going to start off with 50-pound weights. That's a stretch. That's not going to get me anywhere. That's going to just make me frustrated. But if I start off with an 8-pound weight, right? Maybe a 5-pound weight's okay, but an 8-pound weight is a little bit.
I think 2 pounds actually is even better. I started with 2.
So, right. So something that's a reach, but not a stretch. And I think that's a great thing for kids to have some responsibility, something to work for, that's just outside of their comfort zone.
Okay. I'm going to put myself on mute for the moment while I attend to this. Diane, would you pick up the thread from there?
What the heck? Now,
Thank you.
I appreciate what you're saying, Nicole, and it's very true that kids will rise to the occasion if given the opportunity. And part of it is that the parent has to participate with that by modeling such behavior. In other words,
My
if you're
dear beloved, wonderful
child-
Chef Rusa.
Sorry.
How are you?
Fantastic.
You're not on mute.
He didn't mute himself.
Can we
I was
learn
going to
in
say-
25 minutes?
If the parent is doing the same, if the parent is afraid of what's going on and not sure about their job, and yet is doing something positive
Yes.
to try and resolve the
I
issues,
just have to find out. It's in
this
the
is
dark.
very
I have my
distracting.
smart notes.
In any case, what I'm trying to say is that kids learn what they see.
Oh,
Kids learn what they live.
Not so far.
And if they see parents doing the same thing and not just setting goals for them, but also exhibiting their own goal setting and their own working toward that, then they'll be able to see that they're part of a family and a team that behaves this way when stress enters the picture. Okay, Barry.
Definitely.
Good comment, Diane.
You have to know.
Listen, no, Barry, you're not on mute. You're not on mute. We can't get away.
He could have muted himself.
All right, I'll add a word. I think this is what Diane would think. The model. So think about the parents modeling a certain behavior, and typically, unless it's being rammed down your throat,
did something
you're growing
wonderful,
up in
and I'll
your
have to tell you why
environment,
at another time, but we will
end up
speak again
following.
later. Love you.
Older best, do a great job.
so if
Culture,
the modeling
right.
is good, the kids will follow, generally.
Okay, what were you saying about me? What were you saying about me?
We're saying she
You were never
on mute.
I tried. I didn't know how to do it.
Oh my gosh.
By the way, you know what's amazing? We got thousands of people that are going to be watching this thing saying, what is he doing? He can't know how to put it on mute. Okay, so what did I miss here? What was the thread that Diane picked up?
I think the main point I was trying to make, while dodging your words, was that parents and kids can be doing the same thing. In other words, they're both reaching forward. The parents are modeling the idea that Nicole was saying of finding ways to overcome the stress, the situation, and working as a family to be doing the same kinds of things. Even if the parent provides something for the child, the school provides something for the child that is a reach, not a stretch, that the parents themselves can be doing that as well, and that they can be discussing that together and thereby reinforcing that this is a good way to handle stress. This will help us get out of the situation.
Oh, so let's take the jump from that wonderful word, because I think that's a much better word than COVID. Personally, I find COVID to be too highly charged to discuss. But I think what's happening, at least in schools, is that there's an additional level of stress that has come as a result of the pandemic. That's, I think, the best way to put it. And that what you mentioned, Nicole, is like that zone of proximal development. Ooh, I like that. The ZOPD. You like that, Chami? Zone of proximal development. Nicole also is a frum woman, so you should know. You can share later. Is that the stress factor both in school, which translates into the home. and vice versa. See, the home environment becomes a stress place. Then by definition, almost, it translates into the classroom because kids are going there with that feeling of stress. There's something wrong. It's something that I can't do anything about. Now, you said, Hami, the topic for your talk was great. It's not in my control, but at least somebody's in control, right? And we'll just give a plug for something that happened. The reason that we are having this webinar today, Thursday, rather than our usual Wednesday, is because yesterday was the completion of 3+ weeks of intensive Jewish holidays. And I mean intensive, filled with joy, happiness, peace, and love, and intense. But it happens to be that this particular Sabbath, we are beginning, as is our wont, the usual yearly cycle, the first few chapters in what is known in the world as the Old Testament. We call it, of course, the original Testament, the only Testament. But the point is that it opens with this great line, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. So the fact that we trust that there is a creator in and of itself answers part of the question about stress. See, that one line helps a lot of people with stress, because if you know there's a creator, then there's a relationship with a creator in the universe, and that can be because you're Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Baha'i, whatever, except for a non-believer because they don't believe in God, but at least they can still live without stress at some point. I don't know how they do it, but they can, I guess. But the point is that when you recognize that there is a higher power as such, then that can reduce potentially the stress level, both in one's personal life, therefore family life, and obviously with children, or if you're a teacher, then to children. I want to move to a topic that we had, I'm telling you, probably 48, I think I wrote down 48, 49 questions about. And it really was, I found it eye-opening, a little upsetting, and fascinating all at the same time. And that is these two words. Ready? Homeschooling. We had a lot of questions from parents who said either some variation of this. I don't like the way the school is handling this, or I want to be able to give my children the benefit of what I think schooling should be like, and variations on the theme. So I'm talking now to very bright people. It seems to be, by the way, that there's let's say in the past year at least, a very large uptick in what is called homeschooling. It used to be 5% or less. And now it's in double digits, but low double digits, maybe 11%, 12%. But that's not the point. That it's becoming seemingly a movement. I don't know if it's tiny or if it's a snowball, but it's saying, or a lot of parents were saying, writing in saying, hey, we have a good marriage. My husband and I, my wife and I, we want to be able to give over our kids, and we're not, I'm saying the words, we're not trusting what the schools are doing. Now, it may not be the fault of the schools, by the way, because there's a a domino effect of, well, the schools can only do what the county does, or the state, or the federal. I mean, there's a lot of pressures on the school system, as it were. But I would like, if you could, each one of you address, when you hear homeschooling, do you think it to be a positive idea, not so positive, or give me your own impression of what you think of? Diane, would you go first, please?
I'd be happy to. We homeschooled our kids for several years, but it was a hybrid homeschool. We had groups. We would combine with other homeschooling groups. We had special teachers for the Hebrew language, in which I'm deficient. And we had, for Jewish subjects, we had rabbis that worked with the children. We did it out of our home, but at the same time, it wasn't that we were isolated. And I think the problem for many people who want to be homeschooling parents is they don't know really what they're getting into, and it's a big commitment. It's not something that you can just say, well, I'm really good at math and I'll take this book. We did have programs. We had a particular program that had textbooks and classical works, and it was all in a package and it comes in a box, and you can work with your kids with it. But it's a big commitment. And I think the desire to homeschool is a far cry from the ability to do that. And also, especially if you have to make a living or if you have children of various ages that are going to require very different types of programs, it's not an easy undertaking. And if we didn't have the support of neighbors who we were doing things with, and another family who came in and did math with us, and a church that gave us a space that we could use for part of it, it was a very difficult thing to manage, and that became my full-time job. And I wasn't really teaching the kids as much as I was managing what their life would be like. And again, anyone considering this needs to see the needs of each child and how that would dictate what you would have to provide. And I think, frankly, a lot of people are just not equipped to do it. They have the best intentions, and they should supplement whatever school they choose gives them. And that brings us back to the school choice issue. And if people can choose to go to a Jewish school or choose to go to the type of school that represents their values, then they can work with that environment, knowing that the basis is something that they can agree with. It's also another problem with money. I mean, you have to have money in order to homeschool because somebody's not working, and because you need materials, and because you have to shuttle kids around. It's a very difficult process. I admire the many people who have made that commitment. There are groups that are very supportive, and people can do it. But I think you have to look into it very carefully, and especially look into the needs of each child and the personalities of each child. We had a daughter who did not want to be in a small school situation. She needed the support and the friendship of a large group of kids. And we did homeschooling with her, and then we put her in a school situation, we put her in a Jewish school situation. There weren't enough kids in her grade. So we ended up putting her finally in a public high school for 12th grade, where she got to know the kids in our neighborhood, and she went with them into the university, the local university. If she hadn't done that 12th grade in a public school, supplemented with Jewish education, I think she would have been bereft. It would not have suited her personality. So there's so many factors that go into homeschooling, and bravo to all those who can successfully do it.
Wow, I'm so glad we asked you first. That was great. Well, because you have hands-on. This is wonderful. I mean, you went through processing. You're right. I think to put a little twist on this, a number of people are starry-eyed thinking about the idea, little school in the prairie, a little house in the, what do they call that? And that idea. But you're right, dealing with people, kids especially, and in today's environment, and making sure that it doesn't become in any way an isolating factor, and it becomes very integral to their growth as a human, as well as in the academic field, is really quite important. That was very good. Thank you. Nicole, I'm sure you have something to say about homeschooling.
So really, I mean, I just wanted to reiterate what Diane said, because, you hear all the time that a teacher's workday is not an 8-hour workday, right? And, at least in high school, many of us are teaching a particular subject that we've been trained in and have learned how to teach. I don't
By the way, please tell people what you teach. What is the subject that you are proficient in?
I teach high school math. So I've taught everything from pre-algebra through honors pre-calculus, honors statistics.
Which I am deficient in.
Yeah. So, I mean, if I were to have to teach my children high school English, I don't feel particularly confident that I would do a fantastic job. I mean, I know English. I've definitely written my fair share of essays, but I don't think that I would be a good instructor of English. I do understand parents' concerns in terms of sometimes they don't feel like they're getting what they want for their children in terms of school, because I'm a parent also. And there have definitely been classes where my children have, not had the experience that I might have wanted, but I'm a very involved parent. And I think that if a parent is concerned about the education, there are thankfully today a lot of options, right? And there are a lot of ways to get involved in your school. And I'm the type of person, I'm more than happy to become involved in something PTA or, speaking to my children's teachers, speaking to the administration. I think that if you have an opportunity to make the experience better for everyone, then sometimes that's like a really nice opportunity that you can take. So becoming involved in the school is also a way to deal with those concerns, because homeschool is a tremendous undertaking, as she said. In elementary school, I know there are a lot of states that like offer vouchers, so you could take your kids to like PE classes or enrichment classes, things like that. But as kids get older in high school, there's sports and clubs and all sorts of really fantastic opportunities that it's challenging to do with homeschooling. I'm not saying it's impossible by any means, but I do think it can be incredibly challenging, especially if you have multiple children of different ages. And it really is more than a full-time job. It's not a full-time job. It's more than a full-time job.
Very
All
important.
of these things.
This is great what both of you are saying so far. And I think people, certainly in America, are perking up their ears, and even around the world, because it seems too easy to point a finger these days at schools or at teachers or at regulations because of the stressful situation we're at. And that, homeschooling, why don't we just do that instead? I not open books and speak, and so it takes years of training to become a proficient teacher. And even though there are some who are not as proficient, it's still, you're right. Oftentimes a classroom environment or a greater school environment picks up a lot of slack that you can't have in a home, just because it's confining, as it were, unless you mention, as you did, Diane, to share experiences with other families as well. Maura, I'd like to see if you would weigh in on homeschooling.
Yes, you heard me say that I had homeschooled our daughter. And
I didn't hear that.
Well, I did.
When did you say that?
Earlier tonight. But here's the thing. I live in Florida, and I could remember the first time I heard about homeschooling, I thought, oh my gosh, this is the most antisocial thing I've ever heard. I happened to make that remark to a woman who said, well, Maura, do you know I have 2 kids? I'm homeschooling at home. I thought, well, I'll put the other foot in my mouth right now. Now, this would have been, let's say, the mid-90s, when Florida ranked 49th out of 50 states academically. And wouldn't you know that by the time our daughter was readying for kindergarten and I had her enrolled in school, my husband said, Maura, can you homeschool her for 1 year so we could do some traveling, which is what we do periodically. And I said, oh my gosh, Jimmy, she's an only child. This is the most antisocial thing. He said, Maura, just do her for 1 year for kindergarten so we could travel throughout the year. Well, this is what happened with us. Our daughter loved it. And I would have thought I'd never want to be homeschooled. I was the child, maybe like Diane's, who I needed to be around everybody. That is just the way I'm designed. Get me around every member of society, because that's where I feel like I'm at home. So I'm thinking, how is this child going to do it? She loved it. And we, fortunately, in Florida, and Barry, maybe this is something you're unaware of. I'm talking about, I started, let's say, 96 homeschooling. We already had so many homeschooling parents and organizations set up in Florida, and umbrella schools that we could go work with, where if we lacked something, we could tap into an organization that had the right teacher, that had programs. I think I used to send our daughter up once or twice a week, and she would go do all kinds of PE and all the things that I didn't do with her. So some people think it's the be all and end all, and as if we have to almost turn it into a religion. And I remember that as well. There were some parents, they needed to separate their kids from everything. And I thought, I'm not that kind of a parent. But what I've always told people is do what works for your child and for you. Because you could have more than one child in your own family, and one does very, very well working independently, like our daughter did. She said to me, I put her in school 1 year. She would go a couple of days a week, and she said, Mom, she said, I liked what I did, but she said, I don't want to go again next year because there was so many interruptions. We weren't allowed to talk to anybody. And she said, I get so much more work done on my own. So for her, it worked well. For me, it wouldn't have. And so what I always would tell parents, find out what works best. Are you designed to be a teacher? And I'll tell you, I've seen people who maybe didn't even, this is surprising, who didn't have maybe the best education, but they knew how to get all the resources, and their children did very well. I've also seen some parents with multiple kids, they were too busy slaying dragons everywhere else that they were ignoring their children. And so I think it's an independent decision for each parent, for each child. And then I want to take it a further step and even say for each year, because I know some parents that had children maybe in 7th and 8th grade, and those kids were going through some terrible problems, and they bring the kids home for 1 year. Maybe there were social issues or the child was challenged, and they would homeschool that child for a year and then they go back again. So I don't know that we have to be religious about it, but whatever works and whatever helps a child really to flourish, because you're bringing up a future adult and you want to be able to supply all the things that they need. That's my take.
Okay, on that wonderful note, I love that segue. And by the way, I did find the mute button, so I could mute myself if I wanted to. I can even prove it to you all. Ready? Okay. I think what you've touched on here, Maura, is quite important, and it's something that you alluded to, both Nicole and Diane, is that it's not a simple process. It's not something to be taken lightly, and you are raising, like you said, a future adult. You're not just schooling a kid. You're trying to raise a future adult. So, Hami, would you please weigh in on what you think of or see as homeschooling, because you're coming at it from a very interesting perspective as the head of a parochial school. And we don't do a lot of homeschooling in our community.
So I don't have nearly as well-developed opinion as the other women here. Honestly, I like what Maura said and Dan alluded to. You do what works. The kids in our community, for the most part, are not in public school. They're in a parochial school. And it's small enough that if your kid needs something unique, the school should be able to accommodate it. So hopefully we have, I always say, when I talk to parents, to my students' parents, I always say, we're your child's support staff. Let's work together and support your child. And it takes, sometimes when you're having those conversations with a parent, it's kind of challenging because it's like this side and that side, but it puts us all on the same team. And if your child can go to a school where you can work together with the teachers and, do what that child needs, then it works. But for the cases where it doesn't work, homeschooling is a great option.
So this is an interesting point, because you mentioned, Nicole, about being an involved parent as well as a teacher. And so again, I asked this with some naivete. Is there still a dynamic process called the Parent Teachers Association? Is this really still like when I was a kid, if you can even think back into those ancient days of one-room schoolhouses, where parents and teachers actually worked together for the needs of a particular student? Is it still a dynamic?
Yes. I've worked
Okay.
at schools that have PTAs. I've worked at schools that do not have PTAs. Sometimes it's like the booster club. But there are definitely still organizations. There are tons of really involved parents. And it's not to say, right, that a homeschooling parent would not be an involved person. Obviously, they're super involved in their child's education because they're taking on that huge commitment. It's more that there are lots of ways, right, to be involved. Like, you don't have to homeschool a kid if you don't like the school, right? That there are just different options available. And I think sometimes parents look at a big school and think they can't get involved because there's this massive organization, and maybe they feel like, what's one person going to do, or it's beyond me, or they don't, have room for me. But it's been my experience in the schools that I've been at where we love parents. We, there are too few hours in the day to do everything that we would love to do. So I think that it's nice for parents to know that their input and their knowledge is welcome at least any of the schools that I've been a part of. We had a parent association at the schools that I was at for the last 10 years, and they were really active and really involved and really benefited the students in terms of like fundraising and ideas and helping us do field trips. I mean, the ratio of people that we need to do a field trip is impossible without parent volunteers.
So I think that's a very good high note to conclude this particular section. And I think next month we'll continue this, because I'd like to focus more on younger children next time, and the idea of masks at school and what that means for kids. And again, I'm positing that kids are so, I think one or two people mentioned, kids are so resilient that on some level it may not even matter, because in a couple of years, God willing, we'll look back at this and say, yeah, it was a tough time, but okay, fine. It's 2 years later, 5 years later. Oh yeah, we did that. People won't even think about it anymore. But I would like to speak to, because we had a lot of questions about masks and kids, and just, again, the whole idea of rules and things changing and such. But I must tell you that personally, I learned a lot today, not only how to mute myself, but how to be with very interesting input from you, because you are talking to people around the world, and people want to know. People do look to America as still the beacon of light on the hill of what education really means and what it can do. Because let's be very blunt, there are many places in the world, if not most, where education is not like in the United States, where it's very open, very free, very capable of learning what you want and people speaking out. It's certainly not like that in China. It's not like that in India even. It's not like that in Africa. It's not like that in Australia right now. It's not like that even in most places in Europe, or certainly Latin America. The ability to be in a place called a classroom where teachers care and students come most of the time prepared and wanting to learn, and they have a reassuring household, as you said, Diane, so nicely. That is very much the American ideal. And granted, it's under attack from the outside, let's say, because of the pandemic, and even internally because of certain things that are happening in society. But I think we have the most powerful, wonderful dynamic for bringing kids to be young adults, as you said so nicely, Maura, than any other place in the world. And I really am happy that we're able to discuss it, because it's quite remarkable. And we're past our time. And again, a huge thank you. I want to do two things. I want to give what we call a from hug, so we can do that over the webinar. And I'll tell you what HUG stands for and leave everybody with a blessing again, as is my want. So HUG stands for Harmonizing Unlimited Giving, which is certainly what our panelists are all about. So with your permission, the count of three, Harmonizing Unlimited Giving. Here we go. 1, 2, 3. And our blessing for everybody is go forth, live exuberantly, spread the seeds of joy, happiness, peace, and love. Thank you, wonderful Diane, Nicole, Maura, and Khami. Best wishes, everybody. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.